Welcome to the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast, where we discuss relevant information concerning the cybersecurity workforce, business development, and best practices, made possible by CMIS. Learn more at cmis.net. And for a list of authorized publications, visit DewayneHart.com. And now, here's your host, Dewayne Hart.
Welcome to the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast section. Have you ever tried to go to Google or any of the online search engines and try to find out the definition of cybersecurity? If you have, you probably have had about 2,000 search returns. And if you go through those search returns, you could never, ever discover the true definition of cybersecurity. If you have, you are not alone. There are numerous people that do research daily to try to understand the meaning of cybersecurity. And at the end, they're probably just like you. Man, I wish I knew more about cybersecurity. In this podcast section, I am going to dissect cybersecurity. I'm going to break down the elements of cybersecurity. And also, too, you will get a practical definition of cybersecurity so that you can use it for your everyday need. Because cybersecurity is here to stay, and it's part of technology. Let's just talk about some of the goals and outcome of the show. The first part that I really want to focus on is talking about the roadmaps of events. The roadmaps of events are those timelines that led up to the building of cybersecurity itself. Then after that, I want to form a practical definition of cybersecurity, and then just roll into looking at the application and the uses of cybersecurity itself, okay? Because technology is the fabric of cybersecurity, so we have to do that. The next phase is to roll into the protection schemes. How can you protect yourself? This is beyond the use of passwords. And last, we want to look at the responsibility. Who is actually responsible for cybersecurity? Because we know that there's a shift of blame when something happens. And if you watch some of the news outlets, when a breach occurs, there's always the pointing of the finger. So let's start off by talking about the rise of cybersecurity. The rise of cybersecurity started many, many years ago. Somewhat back there in the 1940s and, the 1950s when the military was using secrecy. Secrecy is the transmittal of coded data. And today we call it encryption. The military was great at using that because some of the military units had to share information amongst each other. And the only way to do that was to send it out in secret codes. Back in the 1990s, that's when the emergence of the PC market started. Microsoft came to surface. Microsoft Windows 95 platform surfaced, the Internet Explorer surfaced, and during that particular time, that's when the PC market flooded. I remember that phase because I bought my first computer, and I was happy. So I had a Packard Bell computer with a 28.8K modem, and I could go on the Internet, but there was other problems that I should have been looking at, which was antivirus, because the virus industry was growing. Later on, there was some other type of changes that occurred, such as the antivirus industry just started to explode. And then in 2003, the U.S. government recognized cybersecurity, and the U.S. government formed U.S. CERT. U.S. CERT role was to analyze and reduce cyber threats and issue warnings to the nation. As of now, the U.S. CERT still does the same function. The U.S. CERT worked under the Department of Homeland Security. One of the other agencies that work under the Department of Homeland Security, too, is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, commonly called CISA. There was a bill signed on November the 16th of 2018 to bring the CISA to practice. The CISA served as a risk advisor for the nation infrastructure. When there's a cyber attack, CISA and CERT works with the national communities to try to come up with a root cause. And normally there's a lot of communication that actually occurs between those two agencies. Now, this was just a small timeline based on the rise of cybersecurity, but there are some other factors that contributed to cybersecurity itself. The main factor was technology growth. If you think about back in the 1980s, cell phones was really not used then. People kind of tucked their information, put it in a box, and hid it in the closet. But now information is held in electronic means, like on databases. And speaking of databases, that's where the need for big data occurred. If you think about banks and institutions now, there's a lot of data out there, but the data has to be protected. Some of the other areas that grew and developed cybersecurity was cell phones and mobile technologies. A smartphone, it has to be protected, and that's what cybersecurity works under the fabric of trying to protect mobile technology. Privacy is another issue too that actually surfaced and caused cybersecurity to grow. The cloud, and now the cloud is the de facto type of standard for a lot of organizations. Also, just keep in mind that there was fewer applications back in the 80s and also the 90s. And as these applications began to grow, so did the need for cybersecurity. Now, the rise of cybersecurity is still going on, but what I really want to do is to focus on giving you a practical definition. Here goes your practical definition outside of Webster Dictionary. Cybersecurity is the protection of data and resources to include access control. When I speak of the protection of data and resources, I am talking about a shield. If you think about a brick wall, if you can think about a door, that is cybersecurity. Access control is pretty much a restriction of users and resources to actually go through that door. And so what happens is that dangerous people try to break the shield. And this is where cybersecurity plays a key role. You may hear terms such as defensive, which means that you have to defend the bubble, which is the shield. All right. Some of the other factors that apply is the CIA triad. Every cybersecurity professional knows what the CIA triad is. The CIA triad stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality talks about need-to-know basis. Not everybody should have access to your email account. Integrity talks about free from modification. Data should remain in the same format from the time that you transmit it out up until the time it is received by the sender. And that's where integrity falls in place. Availability is making sure that cybersecurity resources are available, like encryption. And if your primary email system wants to go down, then backup and recovery is required to bring your email system back online. And that's where availability comes to play. Now, underneath all of that, there's another term that is really guides the fabric of cybersecurity, and that's called risk. And there are two factors that make up risk: threats and vulnerabilities. You can think of risk as the potential harm to a system, pretty much, the impact that you would face with the system, such as critical high, meters, and lows. Threats are things that cause harm, and vulnerabilities are the loopholes. So what happens is that threats try to take advantage of vulnerabilities. If you want to reduce risk, what you have to do is to reduce your threats and your vulnerabilities. If you take a common password that is supposed to be 15 characters, and if you try to change it to 4 characters, what you are doing is causing the threats and the vulnerabilities to rise up. Because now what happens is that your password is very, very vulnerable. And the threat is that your password can be broken into. Now, there are certain things such as controls are put in place to go make sure that risks are reduced, because controls are your safeguards or countermeasures used to avoid or minimize security risk. In this scheme of cybersecurity, these are key words to always think about: the CIA triad, risk, and also the controls. If you are a cybersecurity professional, you spend about 100% of your time working in this domain. I call this the domain because CIA risk and controls are what you try to work towards so that you can reduce any type of incidents. For the non-technical people, these are the key terms to understanding what cybersecurity relates to and how cybersecurity works under the fabric of technology. Speaking of technology, there are various types of operational environments that cybersecurity operate under. And I call these operation environment different platforms. Let's think about one, applications. Applications such as online type of applications such as Office 365. Cybersecurity is the fabric on the applications. And now hackers really find more ways to infiltrate systems through applications because applications are very vulnerable because applications have so many code defects. In the traditional method of hacking, it was all about trying to break the defense of a system by actually going through the network, trying to break the bubble. All right. All they needed to do was to find ways to gain access through a firewall or a switch or a router. Firewall switches and routers are at the back end of your networks. Today, things have changed somewhat, and hackers are facing the idea of trying to infiltrate systems through like applications. Because if you get a file through email that has a ransomware on it, that could cause a lot of harm. The cloud is another environment, and the cloud is like the de facto standard now. It's where cybersecurity rides. Data is most important because it's the protection of that data is what you really need. And email and infrastructure. Infrastructures are your firewall, switches, your routers, your servers. If you have any cybersecurity friend, family member, or associate, ask them about infrastructure. Infrastructure is at the backbone. If you ever walk into a building and if you go into the networking closet, you see all these cables that are going right, left, up, down, and everywhere, and they are attached to some type of electronics device. Those are your infrastructure devices. One of the other areas is social media. I am going to say it again. One of the other areas is social media. Social media is one of the operational environments that actually cybersecurity rides under the most. And I say that because social media has become a platform for people to communicate and to share information, but the protection standards from individual has to be really thought about because social media has a lot of gaps. And if you're on social media, keep in mind that cybersecurity is there to protect you, but you have to be smart and take responsibility at trying to protect yourself. Outside of social media, there are different types of industries that use cybersecurity. One is the government. The U.S. government is at the top of the list of cybersecurity because of all the information that has to be protected. If you think about you registering for different accounts with the government agencies, if you go get your driving license or something of that nature, that is information being held by the government. If you think about the CDC has public health data. Data is very important with the CDC. If you think about the Veterans Administration and all the veterans' health records held, this is cybersecurity riding at the bottom of all these organizations. Corporations like Home Depot, banks use cybersecurity as well too because that's your financial information that is being held. Some of the other places that use cybersecurity is regular institutions, I may call, your little colleges, universities. One of the places or people or individuals that use cybersecurity, again, is users. Users use cybersecurity the most, but I think that there's a gap in really understanding the importance of users taking advantage of cybersecurity. I like to make that statement because you are only as safe as your mentality. So if you're a common user, you really have to think about how you use cybersecurity. Now, if you really don't have an idea about the uses of cybersecurity, and if you haven't been faced with any type of information, or if you haven't been given the proper security awareness training, you probably don't have a large focus on cybersecurity. All right. But it's still important to remember that cybersecurity is part of all users. Users have to really, really think about the way that they use cybersecurity. Let's just say, for instance, if John Doe has a password and John Doe takes his password and he wants to share it with his best friend, okay? John himself has just made himself vulnerable. Although John trusts his best friend, the idea is that he has shared more information about himself, because in the world of cybersecurity, the less you share information, the safer you are. Now, your friend has to protect that information. A John Doe friend has to protect that information. And hopefully that's a trusted relationship between those two, because if you don't have a trusted relationship, it destroys cybersecurity. So with that said, let's just talk about some of the other key factors. The end state. What is the true end state of cybersecurity? If you go on Google and type that in, you would probably never get an answer. Okay. But I am going to tell you the end state is creating protection. When you think about protection, it's that shield. If you think about your front door, when you leave your house, you lock your door and you establish a shield. You do not give your key to everybody. All right. When you have a computer at the house, you do not give your password to everybody. When you have your cell phone, you don't trust everybody to have your cell phone. This is called protection. This is the basic foundation of cybersecurity. Now, the true objective of cybersecurity is to create protection and to make sure the shield stays in place, make sure the bubble is not broken. But as a common user, you have a responsibility yourself. Although you may have internet service from AT&T or you may have it from Comcast, there is a level of responsibility that you have in trying to protect yourself. One of the ways that you can protect yourself is to think about ATO, Administrative, Technical, and Operational Standards. When you think about the administrative standards, this is policies and regulations. AT&T have policies and regulations written down to say that every user that is subscribing to the service has to follow these policies. All right. The technical means is that there is some type of technology in place to go and make sure that cybersecurity operates. This is the underlying fabric of cybersecurity, because with technology in place, it goes and it reduces threats and vulnerabilities. The operational aspect is everyday ongoing activities that happen. If you work for large enterprises such as Ernst & Young, Home Depot, Bank of America, they all have a security operational center. And that security operational center job is to monitor the network, is to monitor what cyber professionals call a threat log, to look at the traffic and to see who is trying to break the shield. And the function of that security operational center is to be the first engagers when there's a cyber incident that happens. For a lot of people that choose to transition into the cybersecurity career field, this is the first place most people start to work, in a security operational center. And then after a couple of years, they transition out of that and move more so into the security engineering area or the risk management area, or to be so more involved with cloud and different technologies. These are some of the underlying fabrics for cybersecurity itself, which is the ATO. So I call it administrative, technical, and operational. One of the ways that you can make it work is that you have to establish isolation. Isolation is kind of like an apartment complex. You got 20 tenants that live in that apartment complex. Each tenant has a wall, which serves as a shield. Tenant A cannot hear what tenant B is saying in their apartment complex. And to get access to tenant A's apartment, there actually needs to be a key so that you can open the door. Cybersecurity is set up through security zones, and isolation happens because you want to protect the shield. Company A and Company B is in a large building, but both of them are on different floors. Isolation help prevent what we call spillage, which means that Company A and Company B cannot see each other's data. Isolation is a very, very important concept as well, too. Some of the other areas to be discussed on the creation of protection is identity theft, a check fraud, okay, credit card fraud, financial identity theft, government identity theft, mortgage fraud. All of those are areas that where you as a person that is engaged with cybersecurity has to think about creating protection. Now, for you to create protection, you're going to have some individual responsibility. So let's think about this for a second. Who is actually responsible for cybersecurity? If you watch television and you watch the media outlets, you will find out that the finger pointing always happens, and it's always put on different people, and it's really not getting down to the source. So let's talk about you as an individual. What are you responsible for? You are responsible for taking ownership. Ownership means that if you have a laptop computer, if you share your password with somebody, you are making yourself vulnerable. If that person shares that password with another source, you can only blame yourself. So at the end of the day, think about a trusted relationship. This is how cybersecurity operates, through a trusted relationship. Trusted relationships happen between different companies. Companies don't share data with other companies unless there's a trusted relationship. You don't share personal information with someone unless there is a trusted relationship. So transitioning that same concept into cybersecurity works. And this is something that most people probably not heard before, but a trusted relationship will save you. The other factor that part of responsibility is shifting blame. You cannot shift blame. You are responsible for your own actions. There has been a large amount of people that want to shift blame every time there's a problem with cybersecurity. But just keep in mind that you are responsible for your own actions. You cannot shift blame. One of the ways I always like to look at shifting blame is that when an individual takes their cell phone and gives it to a friend, and their friend goes on their cell phone and go to Facebook and put some bogus information on their account, the first thing that the person may say is that I didn't do it. Somebody hacked into my account. No, you're responsible because you gave your phone away to your friend. You have to take ownership of your own actions. And the way that you take ownership of your own actions is to remember one concept. You are only safe as your mentality. If your mentality is very low and you do not embrace cybersecurity, you are putting yourself at risk. I'm not here to say that you need to walk around with the cybersecurity flag on. You don't need to paint your car with cybersecurity on the side. I am here to say that you have to have a certain mentality where you think about individual protection. Think about the shield. Think about risk. Think about the history of how we have came to cybersecurity today. Think about the industry use. One of the factors in understanding technology and space also is talking about having that hacker's mentality. And if you have the hacker's mentality, this is how you are better able to protect yourself. The hacker's mentality is really about thinking like a hacker. Okay. How does a hacker think? A hacker is always trying to find the weakest link. A hacker is always trying to find harm. So if you think like a hacker does, you should be saying, okay, how could somebody cause harm to me? what is the most weakest link to cause harm to me? And if you're thinking like that, what you have done is built the cybersecurity mindset. Once you transition yourself into building the cybersecurity mindset, that's when you can look at your cybersecurity environment and say that I have a thinking process in place. In episode 2, we will be talking about the cybersecurity mindset. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast, where you have gained relevant knowledge to enhance your cybersecurity mindset. Be sure to visit DewayneHart.com to learn more about authored publications, show notes, and discover more information concerning cybersecurity.